Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I do hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to tonight's second half. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon. And folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's second half. Shall we? Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to this night-ending bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's night-ending bonus, shall we? Today's first terrifying experience. In Ohio a few years back, I was on my grandfather's land doing some hiking with a cousin. Eventually, we got off the beaten path and went deeper into the woods, around a mile or two to be exact, and walked upon a small stream. As soon as we walked upon the stream, a horrible smell hit our nose. Something had died and was close by, but it wasn't your normal rotten animal smell. No, this was much worse. Never paying attention to the phrase "curiosity killed the cat," we ventured onward, following the smell in the stream. We walked a couple hundred yards to a small clearing that opened up. In the clearing, we discovered dozens of dead animals, a couple horses, a couple cows, and the rest were sheep and goat. Some had been dead for quite some time. They had been decomposed and were nothing but bones. Others had died more recently, some up to a week possibly. The scariest part was some of the animals were missing their heads. Others had their stomachs completely torn out. We hastily made our way back to the stream and practically ran back to the main trail. Some will say there could be a farm nearby, and that's the site to dump their dead animals. Honestly, I felt it was too deep for that. And that still doesn't explain the missing heads. Could be a cult, who knows, never went back to that site. So last year, me and my friend were miles back into the woods at some family's property, metal detecting. They own over 600 acres, and we were deep in, to say the least. We walked out to the woods into a large clearing with an old barn my family used to house tobacco years ago. We decided to spend a couple of hours there looking for anything of value. After an hour digging under the hot sun, we noticed something very unsettling about the clearing, and in particular, the barn. Everything was deathly quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. And once we thought about it, we realized it had been that quiet since we walked into this clearing. The longer we stayed, the worse it got. The silence of the clearing began to change into a feeling of dread, and at times fear, for me and my friend. The dreadful feeling was mainly coming from the barn, and we quickly gathered our gear and made our way out of the woods. I come to find out from my mother years ago, before I was a thought, her uncle had been hunting around the same area at night, when he said a large, hairy beast standing upright came rushing out of the woods after him. He claims it chased him, and he ran back home so hard and fast he nearly died of exhaustion. Who knows if he's truthful? He rarely talks about what happened. And when he does, it's creepy to see his facial features while he's telling it. To clarify, he claims that it was a werewolf. Situations had the hair on my neck standing straight up. Whether it was a predator that we know of or something else, I don't know. But I've yet to go back to either area and probably won't. Today's second experience. I realize that Bigfoot and cryptids are questionable to some folks, but I saw something that sure looked like everything I have ever heard describing these critters. So I thought I'd share my experience. I was in Oklahoma driving from Paris, Texas to Henrietta, Oklahoma. It was about 4 p.m., so it was full daylight. I was very close to Henrietta when I crossed a bridge over the Red River. The riverbed was dry at the time, and there were heavy woods on each side. As I began to cross over the bridge, I glanced to my right, just looking around. And about a third of the way across the river, I saw something very tall, completely covered in hair or fur, walking upright toward the other side of the riverbed, dragging what looked to be either a dog or a wolf. But this thing was huge. It had to be 6 foot long. It took very long strides as it walked, but it didn't seem to be in any hurry, just taking its time. I was lucky because there weren't any other cars on the bridge, so I was able to slow down and watch. And as I did, it turned its head in my direction, looking at me as it walked. It was much too large to be a human, either 7 or 8 feet tall, huge broad shoulders, and it was entirely covered in hair or fur. But the most convincing thing to me, that it was a Sasquatch, was its arms. They hung down past its knees. But what the hell was it dragging? I've never seen a wolf or a dog that big. I don't really care who believes my story and who doesn't, because I know what I saw. I don't drink and I don't do drugs, and it was broad daylight. The few times I told someone about this, they laughed at me, even my grown kids. They tease me about believing in such things, but that's okay. They still love me. Anyway, that's my experience, and I am convinced that I saw something that day. Today's third part of the upload. This experience didn't exactly happen to me outdoors, but I certainly think it qualifies. Now I will caution you that I know I sound crazy when I share this. But God as my witness, right hand to God, this is the truth. This experience takes place a few miles north of a little town called Caroline in north central Wisconsin. It happened during the summer of 1999, after my 8th grade year. I lived on a small dairy farm that had about 80 acres behind the farmhouse. Butted up against our land was our neighbor's land that was mostly wooded. But there was a small pond that went through both of our property lines. Now, of course, being a youngin', I was free to move between our property and the neighbor's, freely as long as I didn't bother his cattle or whatnot. I was usually out there with a little .22 long rifle or a pellet gun, just waiting for something to move. The weeks leading up to this, I have vivid memories of finding an unusual amount of deer and calf carcass around the pond. Maybe about 5 or 6 in a 3-week period of time. Normally I wouldn't think twice about it, because we have lots of black bear around there, and they usually get sick of deer or can steal off a calf every now and then. Whatever the case, it didn't raise my suspicion until about the beginning of August. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor of the house, and I had one window facing out back towards our land. Looking from the window, the right plot was mostly straw and the left plot was corn. The fence dividing the 2 fields started at the southern corner of our house, so simply put, you could see both fields clearly from my room. Under my window was a small backyard that was kind of cut into the hayfield where my mom had a rather large garden, about 25 feet by 75 feet or so. Our house was built around the 1920s and didn't have air conditioning or anything. During the summer, I usually slept with my window open and a small fan running in my room. One night I was awoken by a strange sound outside. It sounded like the rooting of a pig, at least that's how I remember it. I don't remember the exact time that it happened, but I think it was probably between 2300 and 0100. As I lied in bed listening to this weird rutting sound that was not too far outside of my window, I started to think that it was odd because my family never dealt with hog, and neither did our neighbors. I honestly can't remember a time where I'd ever seen a feral hog in our area, nor have I heard of anyone else seeing them either. The more I thought about it, the more weirded out I got. My headboard was just to the right of the window, so the whole time this is happening, my face was only about 2 feet from the open window. But it was just a little too high for me to simply crane my head out. I didn't turn my light on in my room because the moon was outside. My window illuminated the fields, and it was enough to see where I was going. I sat up in bed rather quickly and kind of haphazardly flipped my covers off of me and put my feet on the ground. Before I could get up, however, the rooting, grunting sound stopped abruptly. I realized that this, whatever it is, can definitely hear me. I remember my heart rate racing, and it became harder to breathe. I sat up in my bed for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably more like 30 seconds or so. Slowly, the rooting and grunting sound started again, and eventually went back as much favor as it had when I had woken initially. Convinced that this thing outside had forgotten about me, I slowly stood up. What I saw next has literally haunted me for the past 16 years, and the memories are still just as vivid as the day it happened. I remember it with the utmost clarity and detail. I slowly stood up, making sure not to crack any of the floorboards as best as I could. I only had to move forward a few feet to gaze upon the spectacle outside. I looked down at my mother's garden, which was about 50 or 60 feet away from the back wall of the house, and on the left side of the garden I saw this thing. I had no idea what I was looking at, but it sure was not a pig. A bear, a fox, coyote, wolf, badger, wolverine, or any other animal I could think of. I could really only see the silhouette of it. All I had was the moonlight outside. What it honestly looked like for a second was Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's what I remember thinking briefly. It was a rounded, hunched figure that seemed to be squatting on its back legs and digging very rapidly through the edge of my mom's garden. It would hop side to side, kind of like a monkey, hopping about 8 inches or so in either direction, and would keep digging. It was tearing apart the edge of the garden. After a few minutes, it rounded the edge of the garden and started digging the long side that runs parallel to my house, so its back was now facing me. Again, it was maybe 50, 60 feet away from me, and about 15 feet down from where my window was. It did the same side-hopping thing it was doing the whole time, making this really loud rutting, grutting noise. Again, I can only compare it to the sound of a pig when rooting. But this thing was not sticking its head near the ground or anything, or at least not that I could notice. It was just digging like hell. Now this is where it goes from real strange to absolutely hair-raising, shit in your pants, totally insane and fucking terrifying. After about 5 minutes or so of this thing just digging around the perimeter of my mom's garden, it just stopped. It stopped the digging, it stopped the rooting and grutting noises, and it just sat there motionless for about 15 seconds. What happens next still gives me goosebumps as I'm getting them just typing it out. It raised on its back legs and just stood there as a human does facing our fields toward the woods. It stood for about 10 seconds, then turned and faced to the right briefly, and that's when I saw the form of this thing. It was huge. It was no shit, probably 6.5 or even 7 feet tall and had a huge barreled chest. It turned to the right just briefly, but that was enough to see how big it was from the side. So it turns and looks to the right, then starts walking on 2 legs through the garden and about 50 feet into the hayfield. I was kind of squinting now because it was kind of disappearing into the darkness, but it dropped down back onto all 4 legs and started running. As I remember, it ran much like a dog does. It ran diagonally to the left toward our fence line that divided the hay and cornfields and leapt right over it. The fence was probably 4.5 feet high. It was an old barbed wire fence that we really didn't maintain that much. It's behind that field where the pond is, between our property and our neighbors. I remember lying back down in bed and I started to cry. Not like a boo-hoo or sobbing, but tears just came out of my eyes as I stared at the ceiling. I don't know how long it took for me to fall back asleep, probably 2 or 3 hours. I remember waking up to my mom making breakfast, and I ran outside and looked at the garden. It was definitely tore up, and I certainly was not dreaming. I ran back inside, frantic, yelling to my mom and dad about what I had seen, and if they didn't believe me, to look at the garden. My mom went out there and said it was just some animal that had torn through it looking for food. I tried to explain everything that I had seen that night, and they just stared at me like I was speaking Chinese and said I was dreaming or I was mistaken. Later on, my mom filled all the holes and straightened out the garden again, so there was no visible trace of what was there. I never went back to the pond again because at that point, and to this day, I am convinced that this thing that I saw was the one responsible for killing those deer and calves. I never went back there the next 5 years I lived in that house. When school started again, I cautiously asked some of my friends that lived near the area if they had seen anything out of the ordinary. None of them had. I tried telling a few people what I saw, and they just laughed, called me an idiot or loony, and that was the end of it. The closest thing I can compare to what I saw was a werewolf, most notably the lichens from Underworld. That effing movie put me into a paralysis the first time I saw it because of how closely it resembled what I saw that night. Long story short, after the first few weeks of school my freshman year, I just simply never talked about what I saw that night again. I only told my wife about 3 years ago what had happened, which is about 13 years after I saw it. I know she believes me that I saw something out there, but I think she's under the impression that I dramatized it quite a bit, which is not true. After I told my wife about it, she asked me if I'd ever looked it up online or done any research into the strange sightings in Wisconsin. I honestly haven't ever done it before. It didn't take long for me to find what was called the Beast of Bray Road, which has been spotted in central Wisconsin for decades. Reading some of the first-hand accounts of other people only solidified what I saw. I saw in some of the artistic renderings are pretty damn spot on. One of the most obvious questions I'm going to get is, what did the prints look like? Truth is, I don't really know. I went outside that morning. It wasn't to examine the prints, it was to make sure that the garden was indeed ripped apart and I wasn't dreaming. Another question I've gotten was, why didn't your parents investigate it? Well, I don't know that either. I think my mom was just convinced that it was just another animal, that she didn't even bother to look into it. There are all sorts of critters up there, including wild dog, coyote, wolves, so I imagine that any print that thing left would have resembled either one of those three. Another question, why didn't you go back out with your mom and look around? The easy answer is, I lived on an operating dairy farm. After breakfast, it was off to the farm. My little monster fantasy wasn't enough to keep me from cleaning the stalls and the barn. Today's fourth encounter. I have a memory from when I was a child. We lived in another state in an old 2-story home. In this memory, I was looking out of my bedroom window, which was on the second floor and faced out into our backyard. It was night, the moon was very bright, and it had snowed, but the clouds were now gone, and the moon very bright, and the whole backyard was covered in smooth, fresh, undisturbed snow. It was sparkling in the moonlight. It was very still and very beautiful. My father had gotten us kids some white rabbits, and they were in a long hutch at the back corner of the backyard. While I was standing there at the window looking out, I saw a dark figure emerge from the line of spruce trees and move toward the rabbit hutch. When I try to describe it now, I would have to say it resembled what I would call a werewolf. It was walking on 2 legs, but with difficulty, like it was hobbling on its legs, and it was holding its arms or front legs out in front of itself, and its arms were sort of moving up and down, like it was trying to balance itself with every step. The head was huge, sloping down, like a bullet shape. It was too far away for me to see its eyes or features, but it was the outline of this thing, and the way it walked that was so scary. The memory of the way it moved, even now, isn't like anything I had ever seen. As it walked, it sort of plowed up the snow, which was several inches deep. It went to the first door of the hutch, and after what seemed like a long time, opened it and took out a rabbit. I was so scared, so I smacked the window with my hand and ran back to my bed and covered my head. The next morning, my father came in from outside while we were having breakfast, and he told my mother I buried it. Later on, I went out, and the first section of the rabbit hutch was empty, and the snow was all disturbed where I saw it come out from behind the spruce trees. Now, who or what it was that I saw, I don't know. I don't believe in werewolves, and it could have simply been a false memory of a scared little girl. Today's final encounter. I've gone hiking and camping alone since my childhood. I've had some interesting experiences, most of them good. Some are a little scary, but nothing would have ever kept me from going outside alone. I'm comfortable in the wild. I welcome the wolf, respect the bear. I have a healthy fear of cats, but really love the rare occasions I see one. There is, however, one place I will not go alone. I was 20, living in a small college town on the front range of the Rockies. Went for a hike up the canyon west of town to enjoy a little solitude in Mother Nature. Spotted a nice rock formation protruding from the dense pines near the top of the canyon wall. Took a while, but it was a nice, cool hike among the trees. The forest was very quiet. I saw well-used deer trails and found warm deer scat. I saw bear scats and scratches on trees, a kill site where a mountain lion took a deer, old enough that the coyotes had gotten the remains, but clearly cats were in the area. I settled into a little cradle formation by the rocks, had a cigarette and drank, planning to wait a while for the local fauna to forget my presence and go about its business. I couldn't get over this feeling of being watched. It seemed somehow different than the times I had been around big cats or bears. The waiting came for about 45 minutes, being completely still, staring blankly into the woods, allowing my sense to be open to the smallest sign. Nothing, just eerie silence and that feeling. Since my watcher wasn't in any hurry to give up their identity, I decided to change tactics. Drawing my Bowie knife, I sprang to my feet, hearing the slightest whoosh from the ridge above. I turned just enough to catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye. Cautiously and quietly, I pursued the form, catching fleeting glimpses here and there as I followed it to the top of the ridge. No color or definable shape to its identity. No tracks left in the soft, dark, muddy ground, just a shadow. The top of the canyon wall opened to a small clearing and the remains of a turn-of-the-century cabin. The shadowy form disappeared into the structure that was still standing. There was an old iron stove in part of the chimney, collapsing walls of decomposed logs sitting on the crumbling foundation. I circled around it, giving a wide berth to where I could see inside. There was nothing. Slowly I approached and went outside. As I stood in the skeleton of that old cabin, the feeling of the unseen presence being somewhere out there changed to a feeling of it being all around me. I put my knife away, believing it was no bear or lion that stalked me, and then I ran like the wind.
Bonus encounter.
My friend and I decided to climb to a lookout point in the forested area here in Ontario, Canada. It was raining and slightly chilly, so we had the feeling that we'd be alone and not run into anybody. In order to get in, we had to drive a one-lane dirt road that was meant for off-road vehicles. Of course, it had rained earlier, so the road was all muddy, and we could definitely see no one had been there for a while. Once we were deep within the bush, we set up camp and had lunch over the fire. After lunch, we decided to climb to the lookout point to see what we could see in the fog. The view was obscure in the fog, so we didn't get to see much, but you can get a sense of altitude we were at. It was raining off and on throughout the day, so we decided to call it a day and head back to camp. On our way down, we decided to take a different route so that we could explore some new area. As we were walking down, we paused for a second to verify with GPS that we were on the right path down. When off to my left side, near my friend, was a deep, throaty growl. It was loud and deep and sounded very close. With the fog and heavy brush, we couldn't see what was making that growl, but it was scary, so I withdrew my knife and asked my buddy if he had heard it. He confirmed that he heard it as well and grabbed a log as a weapon. My friend couldn't pinpoint the direction of the sound, so he wanted to backtrack. I decided that we should continue, but watch our backs as we retreated. A bit later, we got into a clearing where we felt safer since we could see around us further, and that's when I felt my heart pounding and my stomach churning. My friend mentioned how his legs felt like jelly and he almost pissed his pants. We didn't get to see where that growl had come from, but we concluded that it had to be huge. During this time, thoughts of the recent killings by coyotes was in my mind. I tried searching through sound clips of animal growls on YouTube, and the closest thing I came up with was a wolf growl without the barking aspect of it. But what we heard was far too deep. The mountain lion clips I heard sounded a bit too high-pitched. To this day, we still have no idea what we heard or what was following us through the woods. Alright folks, that was tonight's night ending bonus upload. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and a place for people to share their experiences, ideas, and theories, judgment and ridicule free. Thank you. Everyone stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the answers, and God bless. Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to this night-ending bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's night-ending bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter is a brief but terrifying one. The date was January 10th, 2017 at around 9 p.m. near Wyoming, Michigan. At my house we have a large window that makes up most of the wall, and my dog often looks out it at night, sitting on a bench that's against the window. That night he seemed particularly interested in something. He started a low barking that he usually only saves for the mailman. I glanced out of the window to see something standing partially behind my neighbor's shed. It was big. At first, I thought it may be a very tall man hunched over. Then it started to move. It was definitely not human. It moved right into the open, where I could get a good look at it. It was hunched over, covered in a light brown tannish fur. It moved in a way that was unnatural for both animal or humans. At the time, I had very little knowledge of cryptozoology, so I searched the description of what I saw on Google, and the results showed Michigan Dogman. I looked into it a bit, researching everything I could. I am certain that's what I saw that day. You know, like I said many times, there's two types of people after seeing a cryptid, whether it be Sasquatch, Dogman, those little creature things that people call the rake. But once they see one, they either become absolutely terrified, or they become so invested that the majority of their time is sucked away by doing the research. And that is me and many of you. One thing that I really can relate with this person, though, is how they described the movement. Because when I hear people talk about how it moved so fluidly and this and that, well, no, the way this person described it is spot on for me. It was unnatural. for either human or animal. It was very strange to see. And I guess if they say fluidly, even though it is unnatural, I can see where they'd say it, but for me that doesn't fit. Their balance is, well, what I saw, its balance was amazing for being such a large creature on what appeared to be very small feet / paw like things. And but it was so strange and strange looking, and I never will forget what it looked like for the rest of my life. It is burnt almost into my eyes and brain. So, alright, moving along. Today's second encounter. A long while back, I went camping at a place here in New Mexico named Oasis State Park. Back then, my church had many kids running around, and I had made good friends with one. I was good enough friends with him to be invited on a camping trip with him, his dad, and his little sister. Of course, I brought everything from a Bible. I don't know why, so don't ask. Spare clothes for a 3-day camping trip, a small pocket knife, a lantern, my sleeping bag, and my own tent, along with basic essentials like socks, toothbrush, toothpaste. It probably doesn't bear any importance, but I was the oldest, being maybe 12. Ryan a few weeks younger than me, and his sister was around 8. I'm now 19, and just barely, so you do the math as to what year this happened in. The first day we set up our tents and proceeded to have a fantastic time. Me and my friend Ryan finished our tents and walked to a pond, not all that far from our tent. The trail to this literally was next to our campsite. I find it important now to mention that yes, there were trees, but not like any forest. These were small, feeble trees, clearly recently planted, obviously barely surviving. I remember them faintly, as I didn't really pay too much attention to shrubbery, short of collecting sticks and watching out for cacti when me and Ryan were exploring. Anyway, like I was saying, Ryan and I were having a blast, even if we had to drag his sister around because she was bored and couldn't explore alone. We saw a pretty snake, sleek and black. I don't remember the species, at the pond getting a drink. Once it finished, it shot off into the brush. Other than that, only 2 other features of this park are important. The bathroom was up a slight incline along the trail, being maybe 2 or 3 campsites away from ours. That and a bunch of sand dunes built around a rocky pillar, natural pillars like thin mesas, set ahead of our campsite, maybe 3 campsites away. Beyond those pillars was a fenced-off, very flat and very dry area, if I remember correctly. The bathroom from the front of my tent was to the left, the dunes directly ahead through a badly kept trail. The first day was fine, and that night we got a campfire going, had s'mores, told scary stories. The dad told the only scary stories that night, and I'm sure the man's faith affected the gore level of the stories, considering we were kids. It was about some abandoned building with ghosts or something. It wasn't really that scary. I went to bed that night expecting a cold but peaceful sleep. At some point I woke up and had to pee. I didn't feel like walking all the way to the bathroom, lazy me, right? So I just went ahead and urinated on a small birch tree that sat literally 4 feet away from the tent. After that I was back asleep in the tent. I don't remember how long I was asleep before waking up to the feeling of needing to poop. It had just rained, I could tell from the tiny leak in the tent, and I wasn't going to poop on a tree. Well, my little LED lantern wasn't very powerful, and now my shoes were outside, the tent completely saturated. But I needed to go, and it wasn't going to wait, so I decided, okay, let's just deal with this. Like literally every tent I've ever owned, and probably every tent ever, my tent had 2 doors. Not a front and back door, but a zipped shut door with a zipped shut screen door outside of that. This way you can see outside of your tent without leaving or having the mosquitoes move in for the night. So of course, having heard coyote howls, I wanted to check outside of the tent before stepping out. And also, being a kid, I didn't realize how easily a wild, hungry coyote could rip through my flimsy nylon screen. So I unzipped the tent door and turned on my LED lantern. For a few seconds, everything seemed clear and the rain had already stopped. Welcome to New Mexico weather. I decided to be safe. I began to unzip the tent screen when I heard a very loud howl like the coyotes, but... Well, there you have it, folks. Tonight's second half. I do hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. After all, it is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. These events are real. These things happen. They are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.